Okay, good morning, everybody. Welcome to our presentation today on Italy. As you can see, we have the beautiful country of Italy. Italy is in similarities to France that we discussed already. Italy is a massive producer of wine. Sort of between France and Italy, they kind of go back and forth as to who's the biggest producer of wine in the world. Um, One thing that we do know about Italy is it's a much more complex country when it comes to understanding everything about the wines and the wine regions and the grapes that are being produced in Italy. Much more complicated. There's more wine regions, more complexity in the regions, many more grape varieties, which we'll get to. And the diversity of wines is quite dramatic as well. And as you can see from our map, Italy produces wine absolutely everywhere in the country. Starting up in the very north, where we're actually, because where you can see here, we're very close to Austria and Switzerland. So it's a much cooler climate up there. The elevation is higher there as well. So we're seeing in these particular areas a little bit more of a Germanic influence in the styles of wines that are there. And then as we go down the country, we start to see some changes here as well. And really, as we discussed when we were talking about terroir, grapes sort of like heat and sunshine, but again, not too much extreme heat. And Italy can get quite hot, especially when we look at sort of the bottom half of Italy here. This is a very hot part of Italy. So the quality of the wine that is produced there is not as good as say, sort of in the central part here. We're getting some really lovely, especially red wines being produced here, quality white wines being produced along the top, where it's a little bit more cooler there, which is, again, white grape varieties don't, as and then down at the very bottom is Sicily, which is quite far south. So one would consider it to be quite a hot area, although we have to take into effect the influences because it's an island. So you're getting all of these breezes that are coming in from the sea that surrounds it, which sort of helps to moderate the climate a little bit in Sicily. So it does produce some quality grape wines. One of my favorite places, actually, there was this our last trip for the Euro wine tour. Obviously, we went to Sicily, we were in Tuscany, and we were in Veneto as well. So it's quite a great place many times, and it's probably one of the most beautiful countries in the world to visit. Definitely, the food is phenomenal. The wines are fantastic, so it's a great spot. I know for you now, the third years, our current third years for our wine tour, we're actually going to be going to New Zealand in March. Obviously, we couldn't go. We typically go in the fall, which is harvest in Europe. Obviously, this year is not the best place to be going anywhere. So we've changed it so that the third years are going to be going to New Zealand. Everything goes well, hopefully by then. But you, second years, you have the opportunity to travel with me to Europe next year in September, October, and we will actually be going back to Italy. But this time we're going to go to Piedmont, which is a little bit further here, close to France. And then from Piedmont, we're going to go up to Burgundy. And from Burgundy, I'm not quite sure yet. We might do Alsace. We'll have to see. But anyway, so pay attention, get good marks, good attendance, all that sort of stuff. And then maybe you can be one of the, what do we have, 4 campuses, so 4 of you will potentially, if you're good, can join, and you can experience the Italian wine and the Italian food in person. Does that sound like fun? Yes. Fun. Great. That's what we like. Okay, let's dive in. Again, we can see Italy in reference to France and Spain. So these three countries here are really the largest producers of wine in all of Europe. We're going to learn a little bit more about Spain next time. But today we're going to focus on Italy. And don't worry, there's enough to digest in Italy because as you'll see, it's quite a complex country. Let's see. Oh, having a slight malfunction. Don't worry, I have to reset my computer. So, as I mentioned, Italy has 20 wine regions, completely covering the country with wine growing regions. It's really hard to be driving through Italy and not be sort of passing vineyards pretty much everywhere you go. Huge production, also huge consumption. If you look at Italy, it is one of the top 5 consumers of wine. Personally, I think it's around 56 bottles of wine per person per year, which is a lot. And if you think about it, if we compare it to India, the average consumption of wine per person per year is 1 tablespoon. So there's a lot of room for India to become a bigger consumer. Let's just hope that the government drops the taxes a bit, makes it a little bit easier for us to be able to have some wine. Okay, so home to one of the oldest wine producing regions in the world. They actually say in Sicily that they've been making wine in Sicily for over 4,000 years. So it is a lot of history, a lot of wine being produced there for a very long time. Italian wines are known worldwide for the variety of the wines that they produce. They produce so many different styles because, again, in each of the regions, each of the 20 regions, the terroir influences are different. So within that region, then we're going to have different grape varieties that prefer to grow and different styles of wine with that. So you really, that always amazes me and frustrates me about Italy is the fact that there are so many different wines to understand. It is actually the most difficult country in the world to be able to know everything about their wines. 20 regions, and then within each region, there's a number of sub-regions. Each one of these sub-regions has their own rules and regulations, how wine can be made, rules and regulations about the grape varieties that can be grown. So it's really, really a lot of information. So it's my favorite place to visit, but one of my least favorite places to study because it's so complicated. Italy, as I said, shares the title with France as the largest producer of wine in the world, representing about 1/3. So if you take France and Italy together, 2/3 of the wine being produced in the world is coming just from these two countries. It's a lot of wine. Italy, Italian wine is produced and shipped all over the world. You really can't go to any restaurant almost anywhere and not find an Italian wine on the list. But wine is really, really popular in Italy as well. As I mentioned, they consume a lot of it. Yeah, 56 bottles per capita. Grapes are grown in almost every region of the country, and there are more than 1 million acres in vineyard throughout the country. So it's a lot, huge, huge amount. Let's look a little bit at Italy again. These are the different regions. There's 20 different regions. And we're going to go through each of the region as we get closer. There's 2 islands. There's Sardinia and Sicily, and then we have the mainland of Italy. Just a beautiful picture. There's a lot of history in Italy. So you get the old villas and castles in the background, and then the beautiful vineyards growing in the front. It is one of the most popular countries in the world to visit as a tourist, just because you get lots and lots and lots of this. It's just every corner you turn, there's another beautiful vista. And again, of course, there's the food to enjoy and the wines to enjoy. Um, Italy has over 1,000 grape varieties. So that's a lot of different grape varieties. In reality, there's, I think it's around 600 and some actual grape varieties, but some of these grape varieties, depending on the region, has a different name. Again, one of the frustrations about trying to learn everything about Italian wine is all of these different grape varieties that we have to understand the names are. So I'm not going to ask you to remember 1,000 grape varieties because number one, you wouldn't. Number two, I wouldn't. But let's see if we can think of six: three white grape varieties and three black grape varieties. These being the most famous ones in Italy. We have, for black grapes, we have Nebbiolo, Barbera, and Sangiovese. Nebbiolo is the grape variety of Barolo and Barbaresco, which are really big, powerful wines that are coming from the Piedmont area. And actually, we're going to be going to Barolo next year in the wine tour because I have not been there and I really want to understand that area a little bit better. Barbera, also coming from this region, is actually a little bit more lighter in style. It's not as big and powerful as the Nebbiolo. Hang on, my computer wants to reset. And then we have Sangiovese. And Sangiovese is the grape variety of Tuscany. Sangiovese is the grape variety of Chianti, which is probably the most famous wine that's being produced in Italy. Chianti originally was coming in those bottles with the straw baskets that were around it. They do that a little bit, but not so much anymore. And Sangiovese is also the grape variety for Brunello di Montalcino, which is the other main area in Tuscany. We've actually been to Chianti and we've been to Tuscany in the wine tour. Most recently, we went to Brunello di Montalcino, which was an amazing place. And then for white grapes, we have Pinot Grigio, Garganega, and Cortese. Suave is a very, very famous white wine being produced in Veneto. We went to the Suave region last year as well. And again, in the old world, like France and Italy, we have a lot of place name wines. For example, we have Barolo, which is the name of the wine. It's also a region. Barbaresco. They're all using the Nebbiolo grape, but you'll never see Nebbiolo on the label because that's not how it's done in the old world. In the old world, it's the place name wines. Same with Suave. It'll say Suave on the label. It's not going to say Garganega, but we have to know that because that's our job. If we want to learn about the wines, we have to know what to expect from particular wines by the grape variety. Grape variety is going to be the biggest dictation of how the wine is going to be. Gavi is the Cortese grape. Pinot Grigio is the one exception to the rule. Pinot Grigio recently has become very, very popular. So they really market the name Pinot Grigio. So you will see Pinot Grigio on the label of any wine that's made with Pinot Grigio. And they're making it in huge numbers and varying degrees of quality pretty much throughout Italy, but also around the world. So every country has a classification system in wine production. India, not yet. Maybe at some point, India will get around to doing a classification system. The reason we have these classification systems, it makes it easier for the consumer, you and I, to better understand the quality of the wine by just looking at the label, because all of these classifications are written exactly on the label. When we look at a pyramid graph, always when we have something along the bottom of the pyramid, the quality of the product is less. And as we go up the pyramid, the quality becomes better, but also then the quantity of the production is less as well. So as you can see down here at the bottom, we have VDT, which is basically Vino da Tavola, or the table wine. IGT, next level, this is actually indicating a geographic area. DOC, which is now it's a defined designation of origin. And within the DOC now we have a recipe. We have rules and regulations about how the wine is made. We have a recipe. I always like to refer it as a recipe. What grape varieties can be used to make the wine, and then the style of production for doing that as well. And then at the very top, we have DOCG, which is the highest. If we look at each of the individual classifications, again, VDT, table wine, basic wine, and most of the Vino da Tavola that is produced is actually consumed in Italy. I guess they consume approximately 54 bottles per person per year, which is fine, and it's not expensive. For example, most of this VDT you can pick up for maybe €1 or €2. So you're looking at 75 to 150, maybe 200 rupees for a bottle of wine. So it makes it a little bit more easy for them to be able to do that. IGT is now coming from a specific area, and IGT classification was created for the Super Tuscans, which is it was a particular style of wine that became famous from the 1970s, using non-traditional grape varieties to be able to make wine. And we're going to talk about that when we talk about in a little bit. Okay, now we have this controlled designation of origin. Area produced in, and you need to do in the grape is the DOCG, which is basically Dominazione Garantita, basically means guarantee. So it has all of the classifications of the DOC, but it also, the wine is now taken and it's submitted to a government agency that does a chemical analysis of the wine to make sure that it doesn't have any bad things in it. For example, in India, we have the FSSI. Remember, they did the chemical analysis of Maggi noodles, and they found all that kind of nasty stuff that was noodles because they're just tasty. And we just same thing for analysis. So there's actually a group of each a particular acceptable level of quality, and they get the stamp of approval, and they get the DOCG, which is the highest classification. And we've got our 20 wine regions: Aosta Valley, Piemonte, Liguria, Lombardy, Friuli, Veneto, Emilio Romano, Toscano, Marche, Lazio, Sardinia, Abruzzo, Mole, Campania, Basilicata, Apulia, Calabria, Sicily. So a lot of information. We're going to talk about not all of them because that's a lot of information, but we're going to talk about some of the more popular regions, the wines that are famous from these regions, and the grape varieties that are made there. Piedmont, Piedmont, or you can also call it Piemonte. Piemonte is how they say it in Italy. So if you want to get hired at that Italian restaurant that you're applying for a sommelier once you're all graduated and done, you want to say Piemonte. It's very far north. To discuss with France was the producing a lot of the rosé wines. It's a very, very famous region in Italy, produces some quality wines. Specifically the Barolo and the Barbaresco that I talked about. The grape variety for that obviously is Nebbiolo. These wines are actually made for aging, and it's interesting to know that 80% of all wine that is produced today is meant to be consumed as soon as it comes on sale. Made to age. And the reason we want to age them is because the wines will get better. They get better with time. But like everything, over time, the quality of it will increase But then at some point, it's, you know, it's not going to continue to go up, 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 up forever. There's going to be that arc, and then it's going to start to not be as good going down. So Barolo, Barbaresco, these are wines that actually benefit from aging. And if you can drink a 10-year-old Barolo, it's going to taste much, much better than a 3-year-old Barolo. So these are the wines that we really want to be aware of that. Other popular grapes used in red wine production are Barbera, again, which is a lighter style of grape, and Dolcetto. Wines made from the Barbera grape are often more fruity, a little more delicate, less tannin than the wines from the Nebbiolo grape. Dolcetto, on the other side, this gives a freshness, and it has dry red wines that have, you know, a very good tannic structure. They make a very famous sparkling wine in Piedmont as well called Asti Spumante. Asti Spumante, made from the grape, and is a very fruity, fresh, not than its French counterpart, champagne, but very tasty to have. Next, we want to go to Liguria. And Liguria is all along the coast here. It's right along the coast. It is home to the Cinque Terre. Cinque Terre is one of the most popular tourist destinations in Italy. It's a chain of 5 towns that are all along the coast. You can actually walk. It's about an hour, 2 hours, but you can actually walk along this coast and see all of the 5 villages. People right by the sea. They actually produce close to the sea. Again, in Italy, they consume 54 bottles per person per year. The majority of the wine that is consumed is being consumed when they're having a meal. Wine and food. You don't have a meal in maybe breakfast. You don't have wine. Maybe you have some Asti Spumante if you want to have breakfast with wine. But you're having lunch, you're having dinner. In Italy, they're going to have a little bit of wine with that. Maybe it's just a glass of wine with lunch. Maybe it's a bottle of wine with dinner. So these wines are always paired with the food that is available in that particular region. And because this particular region is all along the sea, the food that they're consuming is coming from the sea. So white wines just work better with fresh fish and seafood. So that's why they produce a lot more of the white wines. They use Prosecco, Barolo, and Vermentino. Vermentino is a really popular white grape right now. Beautiful pair with fresh fish and seafood. Lombardy here, which is between Piedmont and Veneto, north central Italy. This is known in particular for its sparkling wines. It also produces red, white, and rosé, a variety of local and international grapes. The region actually produces about 28 million of wine. It's a very, very large producer of wine. In fact, it produces more wine and Umbria together. So huge volumes of wine. Again, local varieties, but they're also using some of the international grapes, Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, Cabernet Merlot, as such. So the business is quite, the business of wine is quite big there. Friuli is here. Friuli is actually very close to Switzerland. We're getting very high up in elevation. And because we have, it's close to Switzerland, we're getting that Germanic influence in the wine production. And again, just because there's a border doesn't mean everything changes at the border. You'll find that, especially in wine, the styles of the wine will bleed across the border. And we see here, we're getting this noticeable Slavic and Germanic influences. Nearly 62% of the wines produced in the region fall under the DOC designation, which means that they have achieved a good level of quality. Known primarily for its white wines, because again, that elevation the cooler climate, the white grapes are going to be more successful. It ranks with Tuscany and Piedmont as far as having very, very high quality wines being produced with this area, albeit the wines tend to be more white wines produced here. Now, Veneto. Veneto is here. Again, Veneto is where we visited last year for a wine tour. Home to the famous Suave Wines. Most of the wines that I find from Suave available here, especially in the States, or even in India, are more of the simple ones. They're not so incredible. But when you get to Italy and you experience some of these very, very high quality wines being produced in Suave, they are phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal. And we were able to taste a number of really, really high quality wines. And again, it's made from the Garganega grape, which is a delicious grape. It is also known for and Bordellino, which are the red wines that are produced here. Veneto growers are among the most modernized in Italy. In a lot of Italy, especially once we're in the northern part of Italy, or sorry, in the southern part of Italy, they've been making wine the same way for hundreds of years, and they really don't change that much. So we're seeing a lot of tradition in some of these other regions where they kind of just follow the way wine has been made for hundreds of years. Where in Veneto, they embrace a little bit more modern techniques because they understand it can help them to make a better quality wine. So if, again, demand for Veneto wines and its producers are starting to experiment a little bit with Cabernet, Chardonnay, and some other varieties. Annual production is about 8.5 million hectoliters, which is a lot of wine. White wines, about 55% of the production. And one of the wines, which is quite special in Veneto, is the Amarone. And the Amarone is done in a particular special way. They actually pick the grapes, but after they pick the grapes, they don't start making wine from it right away. They actually take the grapes. Excuse me one second. They actually take the grapes, and I have a picture of it. Sorry, my computer's acting up. They take the grapes and they put them on these flat baskets, and they allow the grapes to sit there, and they put them in these temperature-controlled warehouses. They put them in these temperature-controlled warehouses, and they allow the grapes to concentrate a little bit. They allow the water to evaporate a bit. So we're basically drying the grapes a little bit. And what they're doing is they're reducing the water levels in the grapes by about 30%. And in doing so, they are concentrating the sugar flavor of the wine in it. And it gives, number one, it gives a slightly higher alcohol percentage because we're dealing with a lot more sugar. Also, make much more concentrated and intensely flavored. And you can see here where they put them, these actually are bamboo. They are sticks of bamboo that make up the bottom of the basket. And then these are all stacked. And this is actually a close-up picture of the grapes ripening. And what you don't notice here is it's actually, these are all stacked up about 2 stories tall. And those are massive, absolutely massive warehouses. So there's all of these grapes that are sitting in the And the grapes are basically starting to do it. They're getting in about 30% of the water. It just makes for a lovely, lovely wine. And then again, in the middle of Italy, we have Tuscany, and Tuscany is such a beautiful, beautiful part of Italy. It produces some of the most famous wines. It's home to Chianti and Brunello, the Montalcino. These are the grapes primarily used Sangiovese. In fact, Brunello Sangiovese, DOC rules say Montalcino, you can only, depending where you see it, to, in some places they can, I think up to about 20% other grapes used in it. Tuscany is also very famous for its wine called Vinsanto. And Vinsanto is made in a similar way to way Amarone is, the grapes and dry them out. But with Vinsanto, they allow the grapes to get quite dried out. Again, approach raisins, but not quite. I would think they've lost. They'll put the grapes and they'll hang them on strings, and they'll put them in the roof of the cellars where it's actually quite warm because the hot air rises, and they leave them up there, and then these grapes dry out, and then they press them, and again they're getting much more concentrated grape juice, and they make a wine, and they then put them in these small oak barrels, and then they'll leave these oak barrels up into the rafters of the warehouses as well, where it is warmer, and they leave them there for many years, 5 years to 10 years to 20 years. They'll leave them in these barrels, and it just creates this very, very beautiful dessert wine called Vinsanto. And Tuscany is also home to this category of wines called Super Tuscan. And Super Tuscan started in the 70s. And basically what Super Tuscans were, they were wines that were made in Tuscany, but they were using French grape varieties to produce them. And the reason for this was, you know, there was a lot of popularity in the 70s and 80s in the New World, where they were planting all of these Cabernet and Merlot grapes that were famous from France, because this is where they were. They were gaining a lot of attention. And there was a handful of winemakers in Tuscany that wanted to experiment with these French grape varieties, because they knew that these French grape varieties, specifically coming from Bordeaux, were producing extremely high quality wines. But the concept of planting a French grape in Italian soil was something that many people would never do, because again, anytime you have two countries that share a border, think India, Pakistan. We've got France and Italy. They don't always get along. And the French and the Italians, especially after the war, they were not big friends. So that concept of growing French grapes was quite, how to say it, it was just something that not everyone would have done. But there was a handful of these small producers that decided that they were going to experiment. Some were actually making grapes that were 100% wine made, 100% French grapes. But what other people were doing, and actually started to really fuel this Super Tuscan movement, was using the French grapes, specifically Cabernet and Merlot typically. But then they were also blending in the Tuscan grape Sangiovese. And they found that this addition of the Sangiovese, the native grape of Tuscany, with Cabernet and Merlot actually produced absolutely phenomenal, delicious wines. And these wines went on to become super famous and quite desirable and quite expensive. And they were able to sell their wines for a much higher price than they would have been able to do had they just used the Italian grape varieties. So Super Tuscan wines have quite a history. And we were actually able to visit Tenuta San Guido in Tuscany when we were there, and they produce a very famous wine called Sasikaya. And Sasikaya was probably one of the first super Tuscan wines to be made. Has a very long, interesting story, but phenomenal wines. And it was, this is where we see the introduction of that classification IGT. Remember, we had the Vino da Tavola, the DOC, and the DOCG. That second category, the IGT, was actually added later. More recently, I think it was in the 80s. And the reason they did that was because this, that very sought after classification, the DOCG and the DOC, in Tuscany specifically, didn't allow for these French grapes to be used in the production. So once they started to use French grapes in the production of the wine, they weren't able to get a DOC classification or the desired DOCG classification, because it had a grape that wasn't allowed. So they complained and they complained. And at the time, the Italian government didn't want to change it because, again, as I told you, Italians don't like to change. They had to keep things the same. So they actually said, we're going to create a new designation, IGT. So if you see IGT on a label of a wine in Italy, it most likely has non-Italian grape varieties, typically the international grapes that we find coming from France: Chardonnay, Sauvignon Blanc, Pinot Noir, Cabernet, Merlot. Now they have evolved, and you can get these DOCG classifications now. In some areas, they've changed the DOC rules that you can use these grapes, and you can now get that desired DOCG, which is what they want. So that's that. Our next area is Abruzzo, and Abruzzo is a little bit further down on the coast. And again, as a coastal vineyard, gets the influence of the breezes, which helps to moderate the climate. Excuse me, again, we're just rebooting. I'm not sure what's going on with my computer today. 1 second. Okay, let's go. Abruzzo, where are you? There we go. Again, Abruzzo, let's look at it on the map here. Abruzzo is right here along the coast. We're on the Adriatic Sea. Very rugged terrain, a lot of mountains there. 65% of the terrain is mountains. 42 million of cases of wine are produced here, making it the 5th largest producer in Italy. Huge volumes of wine being produced here, but they are sort of a very average quality. So lots and lots of wine being made. Quality is very average, prices are very low. And often they will be sold, the grapes, to the negotiants in Piedmont and Veneto, and they'll blend them into some of their wines. They do make a very beautiful Montepulciano de Abruzzo, made from the Montepulciano grape. And this is one of the widely exported wines from Italy. Calabria. Calabria is right down here at the very bottom. It is the toe of the boot. As they say, Italy is like a boot. This is the lady's boot. She's got the heel. This is her toe. She's kicking Sicily, the ball. Calabria is not so, why I like to talk about Calabria, it's not so much about the wine that's being produced there, because again, it's quite far north, or sorry, quite far south. So the quality of the wines are not that great. Really quite simple wines being produced here, but this region was very, very industrialized. There was a very, very poor population that lived here. And they really, really suffered financially, especially after the World War II. And what happened was, what's interesting about this area is a lot of the people after the war, the economy was so bad that they couldn't stay and make a living there. So many of them actually moved from Italy to Argentina and to the United States. And these were sort of the beginning of the resurgence of wine production in the US, which had stopped since Prohibition, and it really started to fuel the growing of grapes and making of wine in Argentina. So you'll find the history of the pioneers of winemaking around the mid 1900s in the United States and the mid 1900s in Argentina. These people that were making the wines then were actually coming from Italy, and specifically coming from this area because of this big outflux. And again, when they left, they were bringing with them cuttings of their vines, because they knew they wanted to make wine when they went. So they would take the cuttings of the wines with them when they got on the boat to fly to go to the United States. And then they got there, then they found some land, they planted the grapes, and this is how we have a lot of the basis of the wine culture in these, because of this group of people. It's fantastic. We went to Palermo. We visited Marsala. Marsala is home to a very, very older wine. They say vines have been growing 1,000 years, about 4,000 years that they have been growing in making wine. Mediterranean almost. It's getting influence around the from the Middle East. They were coming over in Sicily. Again, learned in the Mediterranean. Absolutely beautiful amount of quality of wine being produced. It's native grape, Nero d'Avola is very famous. They are also doing a lot of wine, traditional grape varieties of, and there's a unique attribute that the soil in Sicily gives the wine. It's a very interesting aspect that it gets. You can imagine Sicily was a volcano. So the soil lends a certain earthy character to the wine that is actually quite noticeable. And Sicily is kind of one of the new sexies when it comes to popular wines that are being very much popular right now. So all of these wines coming from Sicily are really, really popular. Seeing them in some of the best restaurants now being put on the list, and that's a great, great country. So this is Sicily. This is Italy. So students, if you have any questions, now's the time. If you want to send your messages to the chat group, and then once we get some questions in, if you can put them on to me, and I can answer any questions that the students may have. While we're waiting for that, I put in here a few pictures.
Sort of the chat box is enabled.
The winery in Tuscany that we had visited. Go ahead.
Yes, the chat box is visible actually. No, the students will be sending.
Exactly. Chat box is visible. Just take the question in your mobile and.
Yes. So, Mr. Edgar, the faculties from each campus will be asking the questions to you. The students are personally sending us. So we can go ahead with our questions. So, am I audible to you?
Yes, perfect.
Yes, Mr. Edgar to be unmuted, I think, one more time.
Okay, there we go. So
Yes.
do we have any questions?
Yes, so actually all the students have, because the chat box is visible, they have sent it to us personally. So all the faculties will
Okay,
be
great.
asking questions to you, sir.
Super.
Yes. So I'll put a question from the Bangalore campus first, uh, from the Italian wine, sir. So the students is asking the DOCG, which is the highest quality classification in wine, Italian wine. So we have learned it's quite difficult to achieve compared to DOC, because the wine started in the qualification started in 1963-64, but the first DOCG award given someone in 1980. So what is the difference between DOC and DOCG, sir, in terms of quality classification and laws?
I think his video got stopped.
Yes,
I
actually.
didn't get your question as good. You were breaking up a little bit, but I think I understand what you're trying to say is, and again, yeah, ideally, I think everyone would like to get this DOCG classification because it is the highest, but to get it, you have to follow a lot of the strict controls that are in place. And these controls actually add to the cost of the wine. So the more rules and regulations there is, and the reason these rules and regulations are there are to ensure quality. For example, one of the biggest things that we see that affects quality but also affects cost is the yield. Yield meaning how many tons of grapes are you allowed to get out of a particular hectare, for example, of land. And if you have less grapes growing on the vines, these grapes are going to be of higher quality because they're not competing as much for all of the nutrient that the vine is producing. But you're only able to produce, you're producing less bottles per vineyard that you have. So yes, it's nice to be able to achieve the DOCG, but there has to be a balance of cost and return.
Thank you so much, sir. Over to you, other campuses. Maybe Sonia ma'am can
Yeah,
start.
this is from Jaipur. Student wants to know, sir, Mr. Edgar, you have shown slides where the grapes have been stacked in storied, like, if you can please explain that part.
Yeah, they're basically stacked on single layers on these bamboo mats. And the reason it's bamboo is because there's space between the different sticks of bamboo that allow the air to circulate. And what is happening is circulates to these grapes over a period of about 3 months. Again, on average, a ripe grape has 80% water and then 20% sugars and all of the flavors and ingredients that make grapes taste like grapes. So by concentrating that, getting rid of a third of the moisture. So instead of 80% water, maybe we've only got 60% water, and now we have 40% of the sugars and the concentration of the flavors. So you're starting off with a much more concentrated grape juice. And this concentrated grape juice is just going to give you more intensity of flavor and characteristics and quality in that. So it's something that really needs to be experienced to taste it, to be able to understand it. But it just, by removing the water, we're concentrating all of the flavors and characteristics of the grape. And it just makes for a really interesting wine.
Okay, the next question is, like the Alsace in France, which is the cheapest region in Italy?
The cheapest region?
The chilliest, the winter where it's very
chilliest, the coolest. Well, as we said, let's go to a map. These areas here, because they're the furthest north. They are the furthest north, but especially Trentino and Friuli. Not only are they the furthest north, but they're also, we're getting into a mountain range there. So we're getting north as far as climatic, but then you're also getting elevation. So the elevation is all. So these areas here are the coolest in Italy.
Got it, sir.
A little bit these other ones as well, but more at the very, very top. Okay.
The borderline. Question is, I don't know, I just missed the slides or not. If you can tell me something about Prosecco as it's related to the Italian sparklings.
Okay, well,
So not audible actually.
Produced. She went to a Prosecco here in Venice. Prosecco uses the Glera grape, is a particular grape. It's produced in a number of places, but we visited a winery in Veneto where they make Prosecco, and it is done in the tank method. I don't you've learned about action. There is the champagne method, then you also have the tank method, which is a much less expensive way to grow it. But Prosecco has become very, very popular.
There was many good terms we are missing actually. Your voice is a little cracking, so I couldn't get the entire answer. If you can please repeat once again. Very sorry for the thing, but
yeah, I will. I'm sorry for the connection. Prosecco is a sparkling wine that is made from the Glera grape, Glera, and it's made in the tank method. I mean, they make a large tank of wine. They do a secondary fermentation in the tank to give the bubbles, which is a lot easier and less expensive than the method. So yeah, but it's a lot less expensive than a bottle of champagne.
Over to the next campuses. Like I'm through the question as of now. Sonia ma'am or through Mr.
Yeah, I'll take questions. The students are asking here, what is the specialty of the wines that came under the category of DOCG? What is so special in those wines so that they come in the category of DOCG?
Different kinds of wine that can get this classification, and all it is it's the DOCG is a recognition given to wineries that produce a wine of good quality, but also following the rules and regulations are of that particular area. So that's where the classification comes in. It's just that these standards that they have for making wine under the DOCG classification is a big point there. That the yields have to be lower, the quality of the grapes have to be higher. They have to follow all of the process to make sure that they're making a very, very high quality wine. So it's really a recognition for that, but it varies by region when it comes to DOCG, but it is the highest quality that you could get.
Thank you, Keith. The next question the students are asking.
Style is completely different depending on the region.
Yes, thank you. The next question the students are asking, what type of food we can suggest with the Italian wines? Or we can pair with the Italian wines?
Well, that's a pretty broad question because there are so many different kinds of Italian wine. There's very simple, big red wine, and then there's everything in the middle. Goes together. So for example, a Chianti from Tuscany, if you look at that region of Chianti and Tuscany, and then if you look at the particular foods that are popular in that particular region, for example, in Chianti, pasta with the tomato-based pastas are very popular. So any tomato-based pasta and Chianti actually is the perfect match because they grew up together for hundreds and hundreds of years. So again, what grows together, you know, the wheat that they used to make and the tomatoes that they used to make in the fields, and then around those fields were the vineyards, and the vineyards were growing the Sangiovese, and the Sangiovese was made into the Chianti, and you've now got the tomato sauce and the Sangiovese coming together. So that's that. Again, on the Liguria coast here, mostly white wines, especially Vermentino is a popular white grape, and it actually goes very well with the fish and seafood of that particular region. So you have to look at what is the food that was grown in that area. But there's no simple answer to that. You have to get it, not just because Italian wine is a huge diversity of wines. So you have to get a little more specific to the kind of wine.
Thank you so much. Keith, the next question the students are asking, is there any particular reason of using a straw basket in Chianti bottling?
I lost you there.
Okay, I'll just repeat the question. The next question is,
Yeah.
The next question is, the students are asking, is there any particular reason of using a straw basket in Chianti bottling?
Yeah, originally they made these straw baskets around the bottles because when they were carrying them, I get cardboard cases to put the wine in that had the dividers that protected them. So these straw baskets just protected the bottles from hitting against each other and breaking. So that was the reason behind it. Yeah, and they would hang it. They would hang the bottles as well from the top, so they would just kind of hang in the baskets. But that was why. And now it's just kind of for fun. And actually, there's not a lot of good quality Chianti wine made in these particular bottles. They're really just made for the tourists to come and to buy and to take home. So yeah.
The next question students have not understood. One of the students is asking, what is Vino Porto form of wine in central Italy? VINOCOTTO.
Vino Cotto, COTTO?
Yeah, it's a form of wine in central Italy.
I can't immediately recall that particular one. Again, there's 1,000 grape varieties and many different kinds of wine. So Vino Cotto, I don't know. That's a good Google question.
Okay, thank you so much. Only this much questions I have received till now.
No
Over
problem.
to you, Tomishra. Yeah, thank you, Keith. Tomishra,
Yes,
you can take it.
I have a question that a student is asking. What is the most unique step in Italian wine production that you have come across?
I actually think the production of Vinsanto is really interesting how it's done, because it's done over a period of years where the wine stays in the barrel. And in fact, because the wine is so concentrated that they let the grapes dry out almost to raisins, so they're getting almost like a raisin juice that they're starting to ferment with. There's a lot of sugar there, and they actually put the yeast in the barrels and they leave it there. And in the summertime, when it's warmer, the yeast starts to come alive and starts to do the conversion of the sugar into yeast. But then because there's so much sugar there, when in the winter comes, it cools down and the yeast becomes dormant again. And it just kind of stays there over the winter. And then as the spring comes and it starts to warm up again, the yeast comes alive again, starts the conversion again. And this goes on for a period of years. And it just makes for a really beautiful, complex, very, very unique flavor of wine. Difficult to explain, but definitely worth trying one day if you get a chance. But that is one that I really enjoy. I just think it creates a very unique, very beautiful flavor wine that we just don't get very often. And the process takes, they'll leave them in these barrels for 10 years, 20 years. And it just adds to a real complexity of this wine.
All right. Thank you. And the next question is, like we have Sautons from France and Tokai from Hungary, do we have any popular dessert wine from Italy?
Well, there's the Vinsanto, the one I just explained, and then you also have the Marsala
Oh,
from
okay.
Sicily. There's a few other ones as well, but yeah,
Yes.
Vinsanto is exactly that.
All right. Yes. And the third question was the difference between DOC and DOCG, which you have again explained. So I'm good here.
Great.
Mr. Keith, just one last question from Bangalore. The student is asking an interesting one. What is the type of oak they use for aging in Italian wines? Because Italy and France, they don't have a good relationship between each other.
Well, they do if they want to sell their barrels. Yeah, they use a combination of French oak and American oak. So yeah, they might not always to your face say they love you, but they definitely love your money. So I think that's in all countries, not just France and Italy. But yeah, they French oak, American oak. Again, each, all kinds of different to the wine.
Sorry, Mr. Edgar, I just lost you.
Okay. So at the end of time. No, I'm here. Okay, can you hear me now? I think we're near the end anyway, aren't we?
Yes, thank you so much, sir.
Time wise.